I'd like to talk a little bit about three instructional approaches that I like to use when framing technology integration. And I think these three give a good sense of how technology can be a very powerful tool when you're designing for instruction. Those three approaches for me are understanding by design, universal design for learning, and the theory of multiple intelligences. Each has its own sort of approach to what happens during the learning process and why we might need to sort of pay attention to different types of learners or different types of approaches. So Grant Wiggins, some of you may know Grant Wiggins from other studies of education. He came up several years ago, came up with the notion or the idea of backward design. I think he was frustrated in some ways, as many of us were, about the need to cover material, get through material, breaking learning into tiny little pieces and activities, and not having a holistic view, a total view. And his idea was that we should think about what we want in the end. What goals do we want in the end? What do we want students to be able to do? What do we want them to know? When I was teaching American history to 8th graders, I would think in terms of, okay, I need them to learn about how the legislative process works. So how am I going to craft a learning activity that leads them down the path to expressing their understanding about that? And that could be true for any discipline, mathematics, music, science, what have you, beginning with the end in mind. So to break that down even further, he talked about 6 facets of learning. That the process of learning involves these 6 different pieces. And that these 6 facets of understanding should be seen in terms of explaining ideas, interpreting information, applying information, changing perspective on something once you look at it in different ways. Maybe it's understanding a process or understanding how that process relates to other parts of other disciplines. Empathy is part of that as well, to understand the worldview. And then assessing, assessing self-knowledge. Do I know? What do I know? What did I learn? And having that sense of reflection. Yet another approach to learning that I think is intriguing when we think about technology integration is universal design for learning. It's a way of designing instruction so that all students have access to learning. It came out of the desire to provide access to students with learning disabilities, and it has grown to be accepted in the wider community as a way of using technology to reach all learners. It's sort of grounded in the notion of the idea of neural networks. And there are 3 in particular that they talk about. One is called recognition networks. It makes sense. It's how we actually see the world and how we gather information. It could be anything from simply identifying letters and words to recognizing other sorts of patterns that we see in the world, so that our brains do that. And it goes pretty much without saying that experience, background, the development of schema has a lot to do with this. So the next network that they talk about is called strategic networks, and it involves planning and performing tasks. It's what we do when we organize how we're going to go about expressing ourselves, how we're going to put things together. This is these are the skills here that we teach from the very beginning. and we're always, building those skills in students at all levels. So that the recognition that there is this process going on, and the brain works towards forming these particular pathways and networks. The third and final one has to do with affective networks. And it's the motivational piece. It's what excites students, what interests them. So when we look at these three in terms of how we design instruction, they're very informative in terms of how we can think about what kinds of engaging activities we can create for learning and how we can use technology to do that. And it builds upon universal understanding by design in terms of the holistic approach to what is it we want students to be able to tell us. So a universally designed curriculum should offer multiple means of representing ideas so that students can acquire information in multiple ways. So, for example, the printed word is not the only way to understand history. When I started teaching, primarily what I had was a textbook. It had images, it had text, and all of that was quite valuable. But it was a block for certain students. So what has developed over the years with technology integration is greater tools that can allow greater access. What follows from that is multiple means of acting on that understanding and expressing oneself. So technology has provided us with all kinds of wonderful ways to allow students to express their understanding of terms and ideas in various disciplines. So again, technology can provide that for us. And the third is ways to tap into providing multiple means of engagement for students to get them interested. And we have ways that we can use technology now to do those kinds of things, to get them interested. Again, I can tell a story, but I can also now with technology show so many different scenes about, for example, the civil rights movement or the Vietnam War or a particular era in history or current events. So that third one is very important because technology can provide that way to engage. And finally, the third framework that I use, the third approach that I like to use, and I think is very relevant, is multiple intelligences. I think that the sensitivity to the fact that students tend to learn in different ways, and they have strong preferences for how to learn or how they approach learning, I think is critical. And if you look at these, you can see that there are ways in which technology can actually facilitate learning for students who might express learning in one way or the other, or strength, or I guess strength is not the best way to refer to it, but a tendency to enjoy or learn in certain ways. So all of these are relevant when it comes to planning instruction, and particularly at different grade levels, different ages. So to recap, these three areas are important to take into consideration when looking at technology use. And so what I'd like you to be considering when you're working on writing up your learning experiences is integrating some of these ideas as they are relevant and that as they make sense to you in terms of what you're designing for instruction.